Welcome to UC Santa Barbara's Innovator Stories series. I'm John Greathouse. You can follow me on Twitter at John Greathouse. We have Anna Fraser with us tonight. She's the Chief People Officer at Sonos. Sonos has offices all over the world. They're hiring aggressively, so if you're interested in learning more about Sonos, just hang around after our interview and you'll have a chance to learn a bit more about the company. Anna has served as Sonos' Chief People Officer since January 2017. In that role, she leads the company's recruitment, development, engagement, and retention strategies, in addition to cultivating Sonos' culture around 15 offices globally. So there's probably an office near you. Before joining Sonos, Anna served as the Director and Chief of Staff for Google's People Operations, and she did this for nearly a decade. In this role, she was responsible for people strategy, employee experience, for over 70,000 global employees. Her employee and branding and communications programs resulted in Google being recognized 8 times, she was there 9.5 years, 8 times by Fortune as the #1 company to work for. Talk about a track record. Anna drove industry-leading compensation, retention, and engagement strategies at Google. She was also responsible for diversity and inclusion initiatives, as well as a scientific approach to hiring, management, and well-being. Most notably, she worked to open source Google's approach to people practices through the development of the New York Times bestseller, Work Rules. She was also involved in the most read Harvard Business School case, which is entitled Google's Project Oxygen, Do Managers Matter? Anna holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from a little-known school in Boston, Harvard, and she also was an all-American academic swimmer during her tenure at Harvard. That's hard to pull off. Let's welcome Anna to our class. Great to see you.
I'm definitely a swimmer, and this is what happens when I try to do land sports. So
She's playing hurt. She showed up anyway. Well, thank you so much. I know you're traveling, You're busy, things are happening at Sonos for sure. I have 200 questions. We're going to be here for 4 hours, so get comfortable. No, I know I'm not going to get through all my questions, but it's such a rich topic and so many things I wanted to talk to you about. Let's start with let's start kind of at the beginning. So you come from an accomplished sports family. I'm blessed to know your brother, and I know your sister somewhat as well. They're both very entrepreneurial, both very driven. So talk to us a little bit about what life was like for Anna growing up and how that competitive athletic spirit has impacted you throughout your career.
yeah, I'm the youngest of 4, so I got dragged around with what the older 3 were doing all the time, which was swimming. So just grew up around the pools, but we were all collegiate swimmers, and just doing a sport or any type of hobby for as long as I did, 17 years. It was for me just the greatest course in discipline, in problem solving, and of course in teamwork. And just to this day, my college teammates are my best friends in the world, and just treasure all the lessons that I learned through swimming and apply them in my life and work every single day.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I played baseball or whatever, but it was a team sport, and I really felt like I carried that camaraderie, and I value that camaraderie at my startups. When I was an operator, I really felt like we're all in this together, and everyone's got to work their hardest and really pull together.
Totally.
So I do think that those things from childhood, that maybe when you're 20, 22, you're not far enough away from them to realize how they're impacting you, but they will.
Yeah, I mean, problem solving is something we talk about in the business world all the time, and particularly in startup culture. And I feel like I learned that lesson early on from swimming. I had at that time, what I thought was a career-ending injury my sophomore year of college, and after surgery, my doctor said, well, you probably should not go back. And I said, well, what if I do go back? What can I do? And he said, well, you can't use your shoulder for the next 3 months, which is kind of hard when you're not swimming. So I was out running every single day. I was rowing on the erg. I was doing whatever I could while I rehabbed my shoulder. And I think it just really proved to me early on that there's always a way, and just sometimes you have to get a little creative, but stick with it.
Well, but then tell everyone what happened when you did come back.
Yeah, so that was the beginning of my sophomore year of college, and then I think probably because I was building up different muscle groups and focusing on different things, and in many ways just a lot more determined than I was before I went out, I was able to keep progressing throughout my college time and got better every year. So I think I became a different kind of athlete because I had to approach it differently.
Didn't you get your best time?
I did.
Don't be embarrassed to say that. No, I think, but the reason I wanted to pull that out of you is, I know you're humble, but there's a lesson there. A lot of times it takes a setback, right? So you have a breakdown to have a breakthrough. It's hard to keep having breakthroughs in life if nothing ever goes wrong. I mean, sometimes you need to be set back on your heels to make yourself say, well, you know what? Why did that happen, and how can I avoid it in the future?
Yeah.
So congratulations on that. That was not easy. So let's go back even earlier. So let's say you're in 5th or 6th grade, and if I had talked to Anna Fraser at that period in your life, and I said, hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? What would you have said?
I think probably a doctor. I think just at that point in time, it's like, I'm smart. I can do this. I want to help people.
Yeah, I think that's the element I assumed.
Yes.
Was that you probably like that aspect of being because you're a people person,
yes.
right, by definition.
Yeah.
Right? That's your career.
Yeah.
So there's probably that element of like, I want to help people. Who helps people? Doctors.
Yeah. Then I took chemistry. Did not end up pre-med.
Yes, I noticed you're not wearing a stethoscope.
Right.
So you get your undergraduate degree in sociology, as I mentioned, from Harvard. I'm curious because you're not a sociologist right now, and you're not working in that field. What drew you to that field initially, and then did you think you were going to use that in medicine, or what did you intend to use that for?
Yeah, I don't think I actually had any idea what sociology was when I took my first class in it freshman year. I kind of stumbled into it, and I had done some psychology that I really liked, and history, and just knew I liked the social sciences, but. I was fortunate to just have a couple of great professors, a really compelling curriculum that semester, and just kept taking more and more classes in it, and realized, I can focus on the study of individuals, the study of organizations, the study of societies, and really understand how do you make change from all these different elements. And so, I think I had no glimpse into ending up in a career in HR or even what HR was when I was 18, 20, 22. But in hindsight, it has made perfect sense for my career.
Yep. And I asked that question not randomly or just chit chat. Oh, Anna, what about this? I'm asking it with a very specific purpose in mind, because a lot of people watching this around the world and a lot of people in this room start to think, that's the next job right out of school. It's just paramount. Like, I can't make a mistake. And when you talk to successful, humble people, they're willing to say to you, yeah, that first job I didn't really know. When I was an undergrad, I wasn't really sure. That's normal. Being unsure, not knowing for sure is the normal state of being. And just making the best decisions at the time that you're making them is all you can do. Absolutely. You can't really do anything beyond that. So let's go back to your competitive swimming career. Would you do that again? Because we know that Harvard is academically rigorous. We know that playing a sport at that level is not easy. It's a job, right? So you had a full-time job. You had this academic career. Would you do that again, or would you advise someone else to take that path?
Yeah, I mean, for me, swimming in college was such a pleasure and such a rewarding experience all the way through. Certainly the relationships and the friendships, but I think because swimming had been such a part of my life for so long, it was just amazing to have that discipline and that foundation through my college career when everything else is a lot of freedom, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change, and just, swimming was my constant. It was also, Harvard is quite small in comparison to UCSB, but it, just having that immediate social network, that group of people that, were my community was an incredible experience to go through college.
Because you end up knowing sophomores, juniors, seniors right in the gate, and most people tend to know people in their class. Maybe they know one or two other people. That is a huge advantage, and they're so tight knit, and there's so much camaraderie and team building in all the sports, but especially swimming team, because it's an individual sport, but it's a team sport as well. Yeah. So you stayed at Harvard for a few years after graduating. But you decided to go across the country to a place called Goggle. But it already had a fair number of people then, but it was still a much different, much smaller company than it is today. What caused you to make that leap? I mean, that's a pretty bold leap for somebody that's been in a fairly comfortable position at Harvard. I'm sure you had good friends there. What made you make that move?
Yeah, so I ended up working at Harvard for about 4 years after I graduated, after I had a false start on another job that totally didn't work out. I can talk about that afterwards. But I loved working in higher ed and getting to see kind of the inner workings of a university from the employer side of things, and what it takes to make all of this possible. I mean, the hundreds and thousands of people that maintain this campus and do your scheduling and make sure that all of your needs are met along the way. It's actually incredible to see the way an operation like that runs. But I was in the university, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences for a couple of years, and just very quickly realized I didn't particularly want to go after a PhD, and that academia is an interesting place to be with all the tenure and the unions and labor rules and things like that. I thought I wanted to go to law school. I was kind of using my time at Harvard to kill time until law school, and then someone convinced me to apply to an event marketing job in Google, New York, and then I got called for people operations, which means HR, in California. So I'm still not quite sure how that one happened, but yeah, that was the call I took, and then had no idea what the job was when the recruiter first called me. If I'm honest, I still didn't know when I moved across the country to go do it. So what I did know is that every person I talked to along the way was just so humble, so smart, so conscientious, compelling, and I knew it was going to be a great leap. It kind of felt similar to when I had gone on a recruiting trip to Harvard when I was a college senior or a high school senior, and just really got so excited about the people and the culture and the opportunity.
Right. And that's important for students or anyone that's looking for a job. Your first inclination is to make a good impression and be nervous about what your answers are going to be. But you also have to have your eyes and ears open as to the people you're talking to, the culture, their reactions to your questions, because they're giving you a lot of signals if you're willing to pick up on those signals. And if you talk to enough people, you should have a good idea whether or not this is going to be a fit for you or not.
Yeah.
It's funny because in 2005, I was doing a deal with Google with your brother, and he was at the company that I was at the time, and they actually had put an offer, a verbal, to buy us. And I remember going up to the campus, and everybody knows Google now. Not everybody knew it then. I mean, it was well known in 2005, but it's not like it was now. I remember I had a meeting on the Google campus in a hazmat room. They had designed some room. They had so much money, they were doing like wacky stuff. So we literally went into this conference room that was like an emergency hazmat tent. I don't know if that's probably wasn't even there when you got there, but
no,
but that was sort of the culture.
Yep.
It was sort of like the movies, like with slides and kind of the sky's the limit. We should have sold that business to Google, by the way. But yes, it would have been quite good for all of us. So what was it like 2 years later? So you arrived in 2007.
Yep.
Kind of what was the general environment? It was starting to go from this wild, wacky startup to a bit more of a mature company, but had a long way to go.
Yeah, so they had gone public 3 years earlier, obviously a highly successful IPO. I think they had acquired YouTube maybe 6 months or so before I got there, but it was still under 10,000 people. I mean, it was growing rapidly and obviously enormously financially successful. The technology had become ubiquitous at that point. But actually, even when I started talking to them, I think, I obviously have no background in engineering or computer science or anything like that. I had no idea what I would do at a company like that. So it was very engineering centric still, and the beauty of AdWords and AdSense and Google's business model is, they got the technology right, and they really didn't need much else. They didn't need that, that sales force that you see in a lot of companies, and certainly what they've scaled up now. But what was so true from the beginning and still true now is they had a maniacal focus on talent and on culture from day one. So Google was founded by Larry Page and Sergey Brin on the Stanford campus. They were PhD computer scientists who dropped out of their PhD program, and they started building this little search engine out of someone's garage in Palo Alto, and they didn't want to leave the university feel, so they brought it with them when they had the resources to open the office. Meaning, it was open, it was casual. They were constantly walking around in shorts and Birkenstocks and Crocs and T-shirts. They wanted food everywhere. They wanted interesting conversation. They wanted the leading experts in the world to come in and talk about their expertise, and they wanted it to be a really open, high freedom environment where people could just do things and learn, and sort of the the best and most interesting ideas win. And
almost
so
that extension of a university,
Yeah.
like the positive aspects of
Exactly.
flowing ideas in university.
Exactly, but it was very much a focus on culture from the beginning. That they were very intentional about how they scaled in some really interesting ways. And what that meant on the HR and the recruiting side of things is that it was a very intense focus on academic credentials, and did a ton of university hiring and just getting people right out of college. And it was interesting. I started at Google when I was 26, I think, and in the 10 years that I was there, I was always the average age of employee. So it got a little bit older and a little bit more mature along the way, but it was definitely a young, thriving environment.
Mm-hmm. Did you, and I'm playing the name game live
Yeah.
here, so did you run into Bing Chen? He was part of
knew
the
his
YouTube,
name,
part
yes,
of the,
yes.
I interviewed him,
Yep.
great guy,
Yep.
wants to be the modern day Walt Disney. I think he might end up getting there. I'm going to ask a couple questions about the book, but before
Sure.
I do, let's take a couple students' questions.
Yeah.
Reading your profile and it was comparability and a few others, you're pretty much entrusted with employee happiness. What do you think is the most substantial contribution to that?
Good question. One of the things that's interesting about employee happiness, employee experience, however you define it, is it's going to be different for every single person. So, when you have a workforce of 1,600 and a global one at that, one person might really value an open office plan. Another person wants, closed and quiet space. One person loves the flexibility of being able to schedule meetings around how the day works for them. Another person wants a very consistent time-bound schedule. And so we just try to ask. We try to have a lot of communication, a lot of ways to get feedback from our employees around what's working for them, what they want to see differently, and then hold ourselves accountable to making progress. So we run an annual employee engagement survey called Soundcheck. And that a lot of companies do that. It's pretty common now to just ask for that feedback from employees, and don't wait until they leave to do it, and kind of get the feedback on Glassdoor and other places. But I think just ask.
So you don't think one size fits all? Come on, everybody wants an open environment. Remember that whole phase where every office was a big room and people were like, I can't get my work done.
Yeah. No, one size definitely does not fit all, especially when it comes to careers and benefits and compensation. I mean, what many of you might want in your first job out of college and your first 5 or 10 years working might be quite different than what somebody wants who's been in the workforce for 20 years and might want to trade off some benefits and perks for more flexibility or more compensation. So
and we often get, especially if it's a youthful minded company, we get kind of focused on that one age demographic.
Yep.
And then it's harder to bring in.
Not everyone wants free beer.
Right. I'm going to stop the name game, but AdSense, Eva Ho.
Yep.
Did you know Eva?
Well, the problem in working in HR is I knew everyone's name, but I didn't necessarily know them.
She's wonderful. I interviewed her years ago. She went on and she's got a venture firm and she's doing a lot of good stuff. So anyway, she was one of the original AdSense people.
Great.
And then she went to YouTube for a while.
Yep.
So you guys definitely hired and acquired great people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book. So Laszlo Bock, but you were very, very instrumental in creating work rules. And I mentioned it in the introduction, New York Times bestseller. I'm going to quote a little bit from it, and then I want to get your reaction. So at one point, the book says that the best predictor of how someone will perform in a job is a work sample test. Okay, end quote. So that seems logical to me, but some jobs like a coder or something like that seems like that would be pretty easy. Hey, write code for this problem. But how do you apply that to sort of jobs that are less technical or less obvious that a work product would result?
Yeah. That is one of the reasons why we invest so heavily in our internship program, and so many companies do, is there's no better work sample than having you come spend a couple months with us, and we get to see how you work and what you can do, and you get to see how we work and what we do, and if it's a good fit. And so that's the best funnel on it, obviously, but I think some of the stuff that was closer to home to my direct teams, I led an internal communications group for a while, and so I would ask people to do writing samples about hey, we need to write an email about a change the company is going through, or a restructuring, or if we had to lay people off or something like that. Just to see how they'd approach it, how they'd think about it, what questions did they have, where did they want to seek more information before just, giving me a 500-word sample or whatever I was asking for. So that always turned out to be a great dialogue. We would interview for administrative assistants who would get asked to plan an offsite for a team. Tell us what you would do for a group of 200 people to bring them together, build community, have fun, make connections, things like that. So just anything that shows, how you think, your conscientiousness, and your curiosity, I think is
great. And the way you approach a task.
Yep.
So let's go back to those for a second. So if we ask those 250 people in this room to do one of those tasks, we'd see different behavior. Some people are sort of like, I used to be ready rabbit, like I'll run off and start working on it. Like, other people, and that's probably not the best profile. Like, I think a more thoughtful approach would be to say, well, Anna, how many people are going to be at this offsite? What are the goals of the offsite? What is my audience? How do we measure success at this offsite? Like, if you come back with those kind of questions, it doesn't even really matter what you end up writing. The person's already thinking, wow, this person is the kind of thoughtful thinker that I'm looking for this job, as opposed to, watch how fast I can write this in a vacuum, and I write really well. So I like that you take that approach, because just the way somebody actually accomplishes the task tells you a lot about the kind of worker they're going to be.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned in your introduction that you open sourced Google's people practices, which has obviously benefited many, many companies and lots of people. How did it, like in a concrete sense, how did it manifest itself when you say that you open sourced the practices?
Yeah, so a lot of the work we did at Google and what created the book, Work Rules, and then there's a website called Rework with Google, was all about taking pretty common, well-established practices in organizational behavior and management science, and seeing how they actually work in an applied setting. So how do they work at Google and other companies, other businesses that are trying to just put these types of people practices to work. So something like the Project Oxygen study that we did about, do managers matter, that became the HBR case study, that was something that we were able to, scientifically prove, yes, managers matter, and better managers have higher performing teams and lower turnover. And the qualities of better managers, the attributes, are things that are very learnable and very coachable.
And
they're
measurable.
Exactly, and measurable. And it's not just about being a technical genius. So, because of the strength of Google's brand and the resources that we had there and the attention that we got for it, we were able to just do some really cool partnerships with some of the leading academics in the field, like Adam Grant, Barry Schwartz, Amy Edmondson, who does a lot on psychological safety, and really just like make some of these really not talked about outside of academia concepts pop and come to life and be part of the mainstream conversation, and really advance the field of people analytics and of management science at work.
Well, it was the same scientific approach you took to creating a search engine. You created a living laboratory, essentially, for some of the best ideas out there. And I'm sure not all of them worked, but you were fair and conscientious about evaluating which ones did and which ones didn't. Not every company has that luxury.
Yeah.
You guys had the resources, you had the time, you were hiring so many people.
Yeah, we were so fortunate to have a team of, it was called the Pi Lab at Google, People Innovation, but we always enjoyed 314. It was just made up of all these brilliant PhDs in psychology, organizational behavior, statistics, and they were able to just do our own unique research on our employees, and shockingly, like, our employees actually liked it and participated in it, and and the founders expected it and supported it. So
yeah, no, it's a rare opportunity for everyone. It's interesting, like with a Harvard case, the most read Harvard case. Do managers matter? I think someone in a big company would sort of be like, somebody wrote a case on that. But me coming from, in other words, of course they matter. I'm a manager. But me coming from the startup world, I used to have sort of an opposite opinion, right? And I was very prideful and very narrow-minded in thinking that I'm a doer, not a manager. And I sort of wore that badge on my shoulder, right? Like, I'm a doer, I'm not a manager. And that works to a point. There's certain, maybe 200 people, I don't know what the real number is, 250 people, but it doesn't scale. Like, you can't have 250 doers and nobody's managing the doers. So there is a level where, not 3 people, we can all manage ourselves. But there's a point where if you don't start subscribing to the notion that yes, managers matter, your company's going to hit a wall. And I think you guys in the very early days of Google, probably before you got there, they kind of felt some of those growing pains. It's very common.
When the company was about 400 or 500 people, Larry Page famously fired all the managers. Just not uncommon in engineering. People didn't want to be told what to do,
Right.
and
Too many layers.
Exactly. That didn't last very long, as you can imagine. But so we were sort of overcoming a cultural bias of like, nope, managers don't matter, and so we set out to prove that they didn't matter, and we found quite the opposite.
Right. This is what good scientists do. Right?
Yeah.
You take a thesis or a premise and then decide whether it's right or not. But I was in that camp too, right around that same time. So getting back to work rules again, the book notes that the second best predictor of performance are general cognitive tests. So when I read that, I thought, okay, interesting. We all understand testing, IQ scores, but there tends to be a cultural inherent bias in a lot of those tests. So how did you try to overcome those biases?
Yeah, I think getting to Google famously in the early days. Has anyone seen The Internship?
Yes.
Yeah.
Come on, you watched it.
The blender question. There were a lot of wacky brain teasers, like how many golf balls can you fit on a 747, or how many subway stations in New York, or what have you. And they were meant to test your thinking, test your cognitive ability, but they just made people nervous. They made the interviewer feel smart, and didn't really
why are manhole covers round?
Exactly. Didn't really predict how anyone would actually do on the job. And so the theory behind them was great of, how do you get someone to, show their thinking in a hypothetical way, but, do it in something that is actually relevant to what you need them to think about, not some wacky question like how many golf balls in a 747.
Didn't that come out of the consulting world, though, like in the 90s?
I think so, yeah.
It was, I'm going to try to trick you.
Yep.
And then what happened is I went to a business school where they all recruited, and everyone knew what the questions were.
Yep.
Like, it's like, okay, they're going to ask you how many gas stations are there in Detroit or whatever. So it does have its limits. Maybe it worked in isolation when they first started doing it, but then it becomes a bit kind of ridiculous. A little bit more on work rules, and then we'll move on to some other questions. The book goes on to say the best, this is kind of a long quote, so hang with me for a second. The best approach, again, to hiring good people, is to combine behavioral and situational structured interviews with assessments of cognitive ability and conscientiousness and leadership. End quote. So when I read that, I thought, well, okay, on the face of it, I agree with that statement, but how do you measure things like conscientiousness and leadership? Like, what would you do as an interviewer or as a hiring manager to measure those aspects?
Yeah, I think that's where behavioral and situational questions are so telling. If you can just get the person to talk about, tell me a time when you demonstrated conscientiousness and what did that mean, and the language that people use is really telling. Do they use things like on time, respectful, do your homework, show you care, show up, follow through, and just there's so much you can learn about it in the language itself, as well as the example that someone will share. In leadership, I love hearing about things that are outside of formal leadership. So, yep, it's great to be captain of your team. It's great to be class president, but where are the examples where you go above and beyond when nobody's asking you to? Some great ones I've heard in interviews are people telling me about, like, oh, I'm the one who, organizes reunions for my friends every year, and we, I have the Google Doc and I coordinate when everyone's coming in and I find the place. I organize meals for a neighbor who just had a family tragedy, things like that. Because so much of what happens in the workplace is going to be unscripted. It is not going to be in your job description. It's not going to be in what your manager is telling you to do every single week. It's about what you have the initiative to figure out and sort of go above and beyond and define.
And I love talking about that because in interviews, it's not the surface level answer is not going to get you there. So if we ask 10,000 people, are you conscientious? We get 9,998 that would say yes, and 2 that are said, what's conscientious, right? I mean, everybody's going to say they're conscientious or they're having leadership skills or whatever. You need to make sure you can give concrete examples when you're in an interview situation. So don't wait for Anna to ask you to give me an example. Be ready to give an example. Say, people have told me I'm conscientious, and here's an example, or somebody reminded me of the time I did this. You try not to sound too over the top with it. But have those examples ready that demonstrate whatever skill you're trying to convey that you have. We'll take another student's question.
Hi, I was curious, in your experience, what do you feel is the most difficult aspect of keeping employees not just happy, but motivated at a challenging and competitive environment like Google?
Or Sonos.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are just so many just incredible opportunities out there today, both from a compensation standpoint, benefits and perks, and just so many, especially in tech, so many companies that will compete for talent, and it's pretty common to move around, especially up in areas like Silicon Valley. Move around every couple years, and people want to try out lots of different things. So. I think especially as companies scale, but scale can be, going from 100 to 200 people or 200 to 500. It doesn't have to be, Google level scale. It's keeping that connection to the strategy and mission and leaders as the company gets bigger. It's really easy to do it when you're small, when, everyone's sitting right next to each other, talking to each other. Yep, this is what we're going after. This is what we're trying to build. This is what we're trying to go out and do. And then as the company gets bigger, naturally that stuff just gets harder to feel that direct connection to. So finding ways that are authentic to the organization and the roles that people are doing to bring that experience to life is, I think a challenge and a strength for the organizations I've been a part of.
So it's interesting. It is easier for smaller companies to control that. But what the dichotomy is, the cost of a mistake is so much higher.
Yep.
10 people and you hire one person that's not fitting with the culture, it can be traumatic. Yep. Whereas obviously you hire a couple bad people with thousands of people. It's not fun, but it's easier to deal with that.
Yeah, and that for me the scale was what ultimately drew me to Sonos. In addition to loving the products, was that it is pretty unique to have a company at about 1,500 have the kind of brand recognition that we do, and the economics and the strength of the business, because you have a lot of startups doing really cool things at sort of 100, 200 people. You're not quite sure if they're going to make it. And then you have the Facebooks, Apples, Googles, Amazons of the world where, the scale is out there. People know the brand, but you can't necessarily feel the impact of the work as much. And so Sonos is sort of an incredible opportunity where you have both impact and a much more intimate experience.
Right. And the other thing about those smaller companies, which I love, I'm an investor in a bunch of them, on the boards of them, but the other unknowable is they might get acquired.
Exactly.
In fact, most of them will get acquired.
Yeah.
So what's that new co going to look like, and how's it going to be different? So I would think that at Google and at Sonos, one of the keys to hiring good people is making sure the managers that are hiring people are better at it. I think I was terrible. I'll go on record. I did a lot of interviews. I hired a lot of people. I don't think I was very good at it. And I think I made all the classic mistakes that you read about. What did you guys do to try to up the game of people that were actually doing the interviewing and making the hiring decisions?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we were fortunate about to be able to prove internally and bring some science to is that everyone thinks their judgment and their instincts are right, and it's only when you can go back over time and show, no, these are the best predictors of performance, or this is the best way to assess it, or provide the best candidate experience, that you can actually, give people the data and inspire some change. So we did a bunch of different things at Google, some of which we're starting to apply at Sonos now, but just it really comes down to structure and consistency, which doesn't necessarily sound all that sexy from the outset, but if you think about it from the candidate point of view, if you're one of 5 people that we're seeing for a job, don't you want to be asked the same questions as the other 4 people? You don't want it to just be, oh, you happen to know my brother, so you're going to spend the whole time talking to me about X, Y, Z. And then the other thing you see in the psychology is that most people use what are called thin slice impressions, meaning the first 10 seconds of an interview determine whether or not the person wants to hire you, and then they will spend the rest of the time, whether it's 30 minutes or 2 hours, confirming or trying to disprove their initial impression. So it's really hard to overcome those cognitive biases and heuristics that we all have. And so the more you can give people sort of the structure and the practice to help overcome them, and the questions to ask and try to drive that consistency, the better. And then I think the other thing that's really important is just making sure that you have diversity across the interview panel. So, if you have a bias toward hiring someone that you have worked with before, make sure that, there's 3 or 4 other people in the organization who are going to meet the person, assess on different dimensions, assess
Right.
for the right fit in the organization, and not just say, yep, John's worked with this person, we know she'll be great.
Yep. And those shortcuts can work at smaller companies, but over time, again, trying to scale that. And when you rely on friends of friends, you don't get the diverse group, work group that you want.
The other,
just
one more thing there, the other thing that's really cool is that performance is really context dependent. So there's a great book I think it's called Chasing Stars, where, people studied everything from investment bankers to, to NBA players, and it's, not a surprise necessarily, but again, we're able to prove it out in the research that, the best people in one setting are not necessarily going to be the best people in another setting, whether teams change or the company changes or something like that. So, that's why it's so important to not just assume, what worked in your past organization is going to work in the next one.
Right, yeah, for sure. And I think part of it too, and you touched upon this, is starting to recognize your own biases. I know it's unpopular for anyone to admit they have biases. We all have biases, and it could be somebody's accent. Maybe a posh British accent, you tend to think the person's smarter, right? Or whatever it is with you. We're humans, right? We have these kinds of built-in inclinations. And so just kind of recognizing those helps you, helps you go, okay, it's happening. I think this person's really smart. Now I have to really listen to what what they're saying.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about, and then I'm going to jump into Sonos, but just another kind of generic question for a younger person looking for a job, or really anyone. What sorts of questions should they be asking a company, or what kind of signals should they be looking for to decide, is this a good fit for themselves? Because again, we spend so much time trying to impress the business. We should also be thinking about, is this a good place for me?
Yeah, and that really is the most important part of the job search, because sorry to say this when you're still in school, but we spend more time working than we do anything else. So, really getting something that's gonna, inspire you and be a place where you can, express your passion and your creativity and contribute to the organization is so important. And that happiness is ultimately what's gonna drive, your engagement and your productivity in the job. If you're miserable going to work every day, you're not gonna do your best.
Right.
But watch Office Space for that. I think in terms of questions, it's doing a job search today versus 20 or 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago, like just the ubiquity of information that is out there, and the way the internet has democratized and made all this stuff transparent is incredible. Like, it used to be, you would just network, like who did your family know, who did your friends know, where did you go to college, things like that, and just the information you can find out now on things like Glassdoor, comparably LinkedIn, and the network connections you can make there, as well as all of the official assets that companies will put out on blogs and career sites and social media channels. Like, there's just so much information out there. So
well, even on the people's social media.
Exactly.
Like, once you realize, maybe not your first interview, but once you start to move up that chain, I mean, shame on you if you don't know something interesting about the person you're talking to.
Anyone is Googleable. No, I mean, just, do your homework and ask questions that really demonstrate that curiosity, and that you've thought, you've taken the time to, learn what the organization is focused on, or, ask what might seem like very basic questions. And sometimes the answers you'll get from people will surprise you. Ask how, something you've experienced in school or outside of school might contribute to it. But there's so much you can find out there.
Yep. And don't be afraid to have, don't be in interview mode the whole time.
Yeah.
Get out of that interview mode and try to really figure out what's going on in this conversation.
One of my, I don't think he's here today, but one of the guys on my team who's a UCSB alum was, I'll never forget, we were having a mixer with our board members, and he was asking about this guy, Tom Conrad, who for many years was the chief product officer at Pandora and co-founded that, and now he's down at Quibi, but he'd done a whole bunch of different tech startups. And the guy on my team was asking him about, I see you were involved in pets.com, which was one of the more famous .com busts from, Flame Out. But it was just so impressive that he had dug that far back into this guy's resume. And said, tell me about your time at pets.com.
What was that puppet?
Yeah.
They're too young to know the puppet. Yeah, so that's a good example. I mean, if you're not doing that in this day and age, you're demonstrating that you didn't really go the extra mile.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear quickly. So you talked about what drew you to Sonos. January 2017. Timing is everything in life. It was a good time for you to join that business. They really could use somebody of your caliber. I understand that you also are involved in transitioning the founder CEO to a non-founder CEO. I've had to do that several times in some of the boards I've been on. And it's tricky, right? It's never quite easy, and there's no script for it.
Yeah.
How did it go at Sonos?
Yeah, so I was, I'd say on the one hand, very fortunate, but also very purposeful in sort of choosing the culture and getting to experience that through my interview process. So started talking to John, who was the founder and the CEO at that time, toward the end of the summer, early fall of 2016. And he just, you heard a little bit about the airport ride story from Josh, but he was so generous with his time and so very clearly cared about culture, about people, and just led with a level of transparency that I had never experienced before. And I just, I think my first interview with him, we talked for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and I was floored that the CEO and founder of this company was putting that time into me. So got to know him really well through the process, and really got a feel for the culture. And because he was so transparent, he said right from the beginning, I'm planning to step down over time, and I have a successor identified internally, and we're teeing that up. And so it was this very kind of hypothetical thing at the beginning of my interview process, and then it became a very real thing toward the end as we started working on timelines a bit more. But all things considered, I think it was a very smooth transition in terms of, he was able to handpick his successor, had been grooming him for years within the company, and really feel just the tightest alignment on the things that mattered most to both of them in terms of the culture and integrity of the company, and really recognize that, what was needed for the leadership of the next 10 years, right. 20 years of Sonos at that time was a different direction than where he'd gotten it to and where he'd wanted to take it. He had previously been a public company CEO and knew, he didn't want to lead a public company again in the future, and sort of knew Sonos was on the precipice of that scale. So, for me coming into the job as a head of HR, it was such a pleasure to be able to start with a new leader at exactly the same time that Patrick was transitioning over to the CEO role, and really set the agenda together. I wasn't coming into a place where I was inheriting, right. Somebody else's vision. We were building it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, timing is everything.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So you also got to, so you came in January 2017, summer of 2018 you went public. I've been involved in a couple IPOs as an operator. What was your experience? And there's good and bad, right? What was your experience in that process? That was your first hands-on IPO.
Yeah, I had Google. I joined about 3 years after the IPO. So, within Sonos, it was just an incredible learning opportunity and ride within the company. And there were a few folks on the management team who some had been part of public companies before, others hadn't. Some had led IPOs, others hadn't. And so for me, it was a great learning experience and very rewarding to go through in terms of all the things we had to figure out around governance and compensation, and what would change about the culture and what wouldn't change about the culture. So that piece was really fun, and it was by no means a sure thing. I think that's what a lot of people don't understand when you just read about IPOs in the media. And one, they're not usually a Google or a Facebook or some right. A crazy success story like that. But two, many of them don't happen for one reason or another. Companies will go through the process, and then bankers will pull out, or something will change in the macro economy. Yeah, exactly. A lot of them get acquired. So you're sort of, you're working harder than you ever have on this thing that may or may not happen, and you can't really talk about it with anyone outside the company. Within Sonos, we did actually tell the company that we were, starting the process of, potentially going public, and we were very transparent in bringing employees along. But a lot of companies won't, right. Won't tell their employees because it's just so not a sure thing.
Distracting.
Yeah.
And,
yep.
People start counting their stock before
exactly.
it hatches.
Exactly.
And we all know that's a problem. So you guys got through the IPO, you kind of upgraded a lot of the infrastructure. The good thing about an IPO is it's painful, but it does require you to really clean house and really look at everything and make sure that that infrastructure and foundation's in place, because once you're public, you can't afford a misstep. So one thing that I was really impressed when I first met you and we were talking about some of the initiatives at Sonos, I'm involved in a diversity and inclusion project that you and I have talked about here in Santa Barbara, and one of your teammates is part of that team.
Yeah.
One thing that I was really impressed with was that you at Sonos made the decision that the D&I, diversity and inclusion executive, would report right to the CEO. And the reason I'm highlighting that is we recently did a survey of our D&I group. You're the only company in town that we surveyed that did that. Everyone else has D&I inside of HR.
Yep.
What was your thought process on elevating that position?
Yeah, so with diversity and inclusion and frankly anything that you do on the culture side in the workplace, there's a fundamental difference between, whether it comes from the CEO or a product leader or a business leader, or does it come from the HR person? And so, within Sonos, one of the things that I've valued so much is right from the beginning, from my very first interview with Patrick in the fall of 2016, he was telling me about what he was already working on and what he wanted me and my team to work on when we came in. And so it was just so clearly a passion and a priority for him, and felt so strongly that we did a lot of work early on to sort of build the foundation, build the structure and the consistency around our people practices to drive fair and equitable outcomes into our hiring, or all of our recruiting practices, promotions and internal searches and pay decisions. And then, as we've been scaling that up within the HR team, we've also been looking at, okay, how can we make sure that we're, reaching and engaging all the diverse communities across Sonos in different ways and bringing a different perspective to it. And so Elena Caesar, who's our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, is actually, she's a member of our legal department in her day job. And so she splits her time, but she's just brought so much value and different perspective to the work that my team does, to the work that we do at a company-wide level. And she's a great advocate and ally for stuff beyond the HR team. So there's more voice, there's more input coming into the work, and she's approaching it from a different lens.
And one of the things that struck me is when it's in HR, there's nothing wrong with it being in it, but when it is in HR, it's an HR issue.
Yeah.
When you pull it out of HR, it's a company issue.
Exactly.
It's all of our responsibility here at Sonos to make sure that we're working towards a diverse and inclusive environment. How do you measure success? I think that's always the tricky part with good intentions are out there in a lot of companies, but they don't always do a good job of pulling it off. And I think part of it is they're having a hard time just defining what success is.
Yeah, I think success is probably never something people achieve. It's we look at progress. Are we doing better than we did yesterday, last month, last year? And are we making fast enough progress? Those are really the aspects that we look at, because I think I would love to see us get to success in society, but sadly I think we are decades and if not longer away from that still, in terms of equal access to opportunity and what you see show up in the workforce down the line. But within Sonos, we've made a lot of progress and a lot of investments in hiring. So we really try to make sure that we are seeing diverse slates of candidates, that we are out there sourcing from different pools of talent, not just going with who we know.
Yep.
And that we are seeing people for all different types of roles in all of our offices, and we put a goal out there for what we want our hiring to look like, and really rallied the company around that, and we've seen really measurable progress. That said, we're not growing by 1,000 people every year, so it's really hard to, as I say, turn a tanker and shift the demographics of the company when, it was about, I think, 22% male when I came in 3 years ago, and now we're up to 22% female, now we're up to 29%. So made really good progress. It is not fast enough for me, for many people in the company, but I know we're working on it, and I know it's directionally correct. And then, so that's on the hiring side, which is sort of the biggest lever people tend to look at. But then, internally, we also look at all of our people processes around performance management, compensation decisions, promotion decisions, internal transfers, and just make sure that there's fair and equitable outcomes through every part of the process. So, are we making sure that that the best person is getting the job, and that we're not overlooking some aspect that might influence the decision? And then the other aspect that we look at is around just engagement in the culture. So we have a really active employee resource group network within the company. I think more than 10 or 12 different employee resource groups now, and that's really I think my favorite part of it, where employees just take ownership of the culture. Whether it's hey, I want to teach my colleagues more about what does it mean to be Latina in society today, and what unique experiences and perspectives do I bring to the company? How might I look at things a little bit differently? How might Latina consumers look at our products a little bit differently? I think that's the real opportunity to unlock.
Yep, I'm familiar with some of the things you guys have done internally. It's great stuff. I think one thing that we're also noticing with our D&I group is maybe it's because we're earlier in this process than we want to be. I don't know why, but people they're looking at numbers, and so it's numbers of underrepresented people, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But then not looking at what impact are they making? What level are they? Oh, none of them are C-suite. So it's not just a numbers game; it's also an impact game. And people are starting to figure that out. Let's take a couple students' questions.
So as you mentioned earlier, a common trend in the tech industry is for employees to work in a company for a few years and then move to another company. So with that in mind, what are some retention strategies that you have tried to address this problem?
So this is probably a little bit controversial, but I'm a big believer in people who don't want to be there shouldn't be there. Whether that is in school, in sports, or in the workplace, it's so tempting to just want to hold on to the folks you've got, because it's so hard to find great people, and you invest so much in hiring them and training them, and so it's only human to not want to see them move on, especially if they take with them competitive information or specific talent or expertise. But the reality is, if somebody is not intrinsically motivated, there's very little you can do, from a compensation, a benefits, even a promotion standpoint that's going to keep them there. They will always have other opportunities. They will always, you can always get a job somewhere else for more money. Even at Google, that was true, and they're arguably the leading payer out there. So if money is the motivation, you can always make more money somewhere else, but it's got to be about the full culture and the full experience. So I think really understanding that intrinsic motivation and doing what you can to cultivate that and provide the right experience, and then celebrating people as they move on to go to other opportunities. There's nothing worse than don't let the door hit you on the way out, but celebrate their accomplishments, celebrate what they're going on to do next, and show people that kind of growth is okay.
It's normal, it's natural. That was one lesson I learned early on. Because again, startups are such a foxhole mentality. And Anna, we were in this together. And I saw the behavior of some of my peers when their people would leave, and I'm like, really? That person gave us 6 years of their life. Now they're out in the cold. So I didn't believe in conditional love. I always call that conditional love. When a manager loves you when you work for them, and then you don't work for them anymore, they're like, get out of here. Because I don't think you're not being true to the work and all the hard work and effort they gave you.
And careers are long. I mean, you're gonna run into your colleagues and your former managers again at many different points in time. So I think leaving on great terms on both sides and working that network after you move on is a great way to grow your career over time.
So what mistakes do you see recent graduates or younger people make in that job search? What do you see over and over again?
Well, the one I certainly made in my first job out of college was just being desperate and taking the first offer I got. But I think really right now it's what we talked about earlier. It's people who haven't done their homework, who just they just show up because their resume looked great and they stood out on paper and they had all these great qualifications, but they really haven't put in the work to learn about the organization and demonstrate their curiosity and what they're looking for.
Well, one thing I've seen in office hours over and over and over, year after year, is the sort of frantic fear that this first job has to be perfect. And it doesn't. I mean, Anna's first job wasn't perfect. My first job wasn't perfect. I've been fired from jobs. I mean, it happens, right? And again, it doesn't mean I wouldn't have been successful at that company in a different situation or a different time, but that time, that place, I wasn't.
Yep.
It's okay.
Yep. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It
right.
doesn't mean you're not a hard worker.
And then
that
you won't
you're-
be successful.
Exactly.
So I think that's kind of my message is, yes, you want to be conscientious. Yes, you want to do your homework. Yes, it is important, but it's not the end of the world if you make a misstep. And in fact, your early misstep, we didn't really talk about it, but it was in sales. And you learned a valuable lesson there. I don't want to be in sales. And we can, right, that sounds silly, but that's an important thing. Knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you want to do.
I think it only took me like 4 to 6 weeks or so in that job to give myself an ulcer at 22 years old and realize that I really didn't want to be sweating cold calls and that I could quit. I hadn't quit anything in my life up to that point. I had swum from the age of 4 to 21. I had done everything in school and every activity. And so like to actually, just opt out of something was new for me.
It's drilled into us. Like, don't be a quitter.
Yep.
Sometimes
Persevere.
being a quitter
Tough
is
it
a good thing. Just knowing when to quit.
Things that make you sick, generally not great.
Yeah. Well, let's end on this question because I'm always, when I get an expert here, I just love to hear their thoughts on things that I can't figure out. So you've been in the talent acquisition game well over a decade, some of the most sophisticated hiring companies in the world. What is your view of work over the next decade? Like, how is work going to change in the coming 10, 12, 15 years?
Yeah. So had an opportunity to talk a couple months ago with one of the just most brilliant academics in this field. His name's Barry Schwartz, and he was a management professor at Swarthmore for many years. He's done some amazing TED Talks if you Google him, but he said it best, so I'm going to steal his line of just, as you look at, the Industrial Revolution and the history of work over decades and hundreds of years, the first Industrial Revolution was about automating work with our hands, so automating manual labor. Ford perfected the assembly line and all the things that that sort of, came to play in the first half of the 20th century. Now, I think with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, big data, everything that that computing has enabled, we're automating a lot of stuff that's traditionally been done with our minds, and so all the things that require the cognitive thinking that we talked a lot about at the beginning. But the piece that I don't know, I struggle to see how we would ever automate it, but maybe someone's going to figure it out eventually, is bringing empathy and compassion. So really the human aspects of what we do and how we work with one another. And I think those are so much more important now. So many companies are global and dealing with cross-cultural issues. And so I think the more you can develop the soft skills, so take a humanities course, take a psychology course if you haven't really understand, what does it mean to bring compassion and empathy and really understand different perspectives. I think that just goes such a long way as you think about, how do all these different types of people work with each other within a company or across an industry.
Makes total sense to me. I think, everything's sort of like a pendulum, and if you look at maybe the 1950s or 60s, it was all about how can we more automate humans, and people studied it, right? They time people, they had all these and we were trying to turn people into robots. And then with AI, I think you're going to see the same sort of thing as everything's about data. We don't need the people. And of course, it's going to come back to the center, and we're going to realize, we really kind of do still need people, but we can use AI and we can use robotics, and we can all, it's all going to be in a stew together.
Totally.
And I'm glad I don't have to figure it out. I'm glad the people in this room and beyond will figure it out for us. So thank you so much, Anna. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Great.
So it starts 18 years ago with 4 guys who spent a lot of time in a Mexican restaurant over on El Paseo talking about how to create a better listening experience in their home. Simple as that. And just to give you a sense of how innovative an idea that was and how innovative a company Sonos has become over those 18 years, that Mexican dinner, those restaurant visits, all that time was before Pandora or any other streaming service, before the iPhone. And so the idea of a connected home was not really in the mainstream. That level of innovation has absolutely carried through to today, where we're now a publicly traded global company of 1,500 employees operating in 12 countries, but have not certainly forgot about our roots and the idea that we were founded here and have many UCSB grads working with us, some of whom are here today. So as John said, please stick around afterwards. We're happy to answer questions. We have job openings, we have internships, and we hire across the globe about 400 people a year. So I was glad to see the show of hands in terms of the number of people that know who Sonos is. Many people just think we make cool speakers, which we do. But we've really evolved into the world's leading sound experience company, which not only means we make cool speakers with brilliant sound, but have an ease of setup that's pretty unparalleled, a premium design and access to over 100 streaming music services that give customers a pretty unparalleled amount of choice in the kinds of content they want to listen to. So I just want to rewind for a minute and talk a bit about who we are as a company and how we care about our people. Because after that Mexican restaurant dinner turned into a company, there were about 300 people doing about maybe $300 million a year. And then I got a call, which really changed the course of my life forever. I have a wife and 2 kids. My wife was working. My kids were in school. We were not living here. And the call was for a company called Sonos that I had never heard of. And at the end of a grueling, I will admit, grueling day of interviews, at the end of the day, when I wasn't sure quite how I had done, the CEO came out and said, "Hey, I'll drive you to the airport," which, you know, for any of you who have had any interview experience, is itself a pretty unusual situation. And in that ride from the offices on De La Guerra all the way to the airport, he just wanted to know how I felt, how I thought it had gone, what questions I had, and did I have a good experience. That kind of attention to how people feel and how the employee experience has not only carried through our culture today, but is absolutely transcendent in how we think about the customer as well. Everything that we do is about how the customer feels about the ultimate experience of interacting with Sonos. We are a hardware company. I think you could argue we're really enabled by software, but we sell an experience, and that experience falls down if the customer is not delighted in the end. So, as I mentioned, 1,500 employees. It's a much bigger company than it was 18 years ago. 12 offices globally. We have 25 million products in 9 million homes. And the two that I want to quickly call out, just to give you a sense of where we are today. How many people own a Sonos product? Okay. How many people own a Sonos Move? Oh, there you go. Excellent. So the Sonos Move is the first durable outside-the-home speaker that we make, battery-powered, weatherproof. And the other thing I want to call out, too, is we've had a very successful integration with IKEA, where they've made both a Sonos-enabled speaker through a bookshelf and a lamp that has sold successfully and has continued that experience to IKEA customers around the world in a totally different way. So we're continuing that same employee experience in all parts of the world. Just to give you a better sense of what this could be like for you and what it's like in Santa Barbara, Tasha, who will introduce herself in a minute, will talk a bit about the experience of coming out of college into a company like Sonos, what that's been like, and again, stick around and we'll answer more specific questions. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Tasha Aquino and I lead the university recruiting team here at Sonos. How many of you guys are looking for an internship this summer? All right, okay, so this will be helpful to you, everything that I have to say. How many of you are looking for like a full-time job after graduation? Okay, I have a few tips for you as well. But thanks for giving me a chance to share a little bit more about what it means to be an intern at Sonos. So first and foremost, the internship at Sonos is a 10 to 12 week project-based internship. So you won't be making copies, you won't be getting anyone else's coffee but your own. What we want to give you is meaningful work that makes an impact on our business. So an example, on our marketing teams, you might have the potential to work on like a cross-channel campaign execution and development and execution. And if you want to know what that even means, go talk to Molly in the green shirt. There she is. She gave me that line on the car ride over. For our engineering interns, you'll work on code that ships. So an example of that is we have an alarm on our system, and we have a snooze functionality that wasn't always there. That was written by an intern and shipped, and now we all use it. I use it a lot. We are looking for interns on a few different teams. We've got our brand team, retail marketing, workplace experience, our very own team, the people team. So please go to careers.sonos.com to check that out. I want to let you guys all know that for the internships, we have a deadline of February 28th, so definitely apply before then, but actually don't even wait until then. Apply today, apply tomorrow, apply as quickly as possible. But when you're an intern at Sonos, you'll be part of a program that'll help you integrate into the company, integrate into a new city if you happen to relocate for that internship, and also help you build relationships with the other interns that are in your area. So a couple things that we do, for example, is we match you with a mentor. So you'll have a manager and a mentor to help you get up to speed very quickly. We also offer lunch and learns, and these are lunch events where you'll meet senior leaders of the business, and you'll learn about their area of the business. You'll get to kind of maybe learn about an area you've never heard of before. So for example, we've done ones on user research, diversity inclusion, finance, and we've also done one hosted by our CEO where you can learn about like his experience and what it means to be CEO of a company, for example.
It's also okay just to come for the lunch, which I've done several times.
This is true. This is true because they are catered. We also try to do community events, so we want to get you out of the office, out in the city, especially if you're not exactly sure how to do that. So we're still planning what the one looks like for this summer, but to give you an example, we've gone to concerts, we've had dining experiences, things like that. So things that'll happen outside of the office as well. But I think the really important thing to know is that when you're an intern at Sonos, you're part of the Sonos team. So you also get to participate in all of the other cool things that happen as normal course of business, happens. So for example, we have a global company-wide hack week once a quarter. We actually just ended that hack week today with presentations. You'll be part of that. We have bi-weekly catered lunches. If we have a product launch over the summer, you'll be able to participate in all of that fun. So it's not just about the program, it's about being part of that team. So that's what it's like to be an intern at Sonos. But for those of you who are looking for full-time jobs, for those of you looking for internships, just know too that this program is growing a lot. So last year we had 6,000 applicants. We hired 60 interns. This year we're targeting closer to 80 interns. It's pretty competitive, and we're not just here to say goodbye to you at the end of the summer. We usually see around 75% conversion. What that means is that 75% of our eligible interns come back for full-time roles. Obviously, if there's a business need and you're interested and you like us as much as we like you, we try to make that happen as much as possible. So if you didn't have a chance to have an internship with us last year and you're looking for a full-time job, please go to careers.sonos.com. We have listings of jobs, full-time jobs that are open to kind of junior level talent all the time. So keep checking back regularly. We have some posted now, and I think on our sign we kind of talk about some of those areas. And if you have any questions, please come find one of us. And lastly, I'll close you out with a pro tip. In your application, there's a Why Sonos section. It's a free form section. If you apply, please let us know there that you attended this event and take a minute to really put together a thoughtful answer. We actually read every single one of those. So that's your way to try to kind of fast track your application, take a look. And if you have any questions, like I said, find me or anyone else with a Sonos t-shirt. Thanks.